in the context of some common challenges, but also some very common and very effective paths to doing and feeling better.
Yes. No, the unconscious mind is the place to start, because that's the deepest level of the structure of self. So imagine sitting on top of a biological supercomputer the size of a house, right? That's what's going on inside of us, right? The unconscious mind is that biological supercomputer. And if we're interested in ourselves, right, we become very, very curious about what is going on in it. And that's where, even though it's not directly accessible to us, it can be accessible through other ways, such as we talked about reflection or therapy. And of course, there are other ways too, but it is accessible to us. And we want to know what is in it, because what it is in it has such a strong effect on what's going on in our conscious mind, right? That's the person on top of the biological supercomputer the size of a house, or the image we've been using is the top of the iceberg that's coming out of the water. So we can look at that either way, but what is in it has, of course, a huge effect on the part that we're aware of, our conscious mind. And I think the best analogy here, and it's actually, I think, quite an analogy that parallels very well, is to an abscess in the field of physical medicine. So an abscess is an area of walled off infection, right? So imagine that there's some infection, for example, it's often in the abdomen. Okay? There's some infection, and that infection could be really dangerous, right? If that infection spread, boy, it could go to the blood, the person could die from that, right? So the body does a really good job of walling off that infection, right? And that's a good thing, right? Because if the infection weren't walled off, it poses huge risk. But the walled off infection does not represent a condition of health. So someone who has an abscess in them and doesn't know it, this happens frequently in medicine. We see people coming to emergency rooms and, they have a low-grade fever, and they've had a low-grade fever for a while, and they just don't feel good, and they have low energy, and they're not sleeping well, and they find themselves sweating a lot. There are pervasive experiences going on that are really detracting from life, like not feeling great all the time, even though the person doesn't feel really sick. That's sometimes why it takes a while for the person to come to medical attention. So what's going on is better than not being walled off, but it is not synonymous with health. So what happens in physical medicine? Abscess is identified, and then someone goes in, a surgeon goes in and drains it. Right? And then the person is better, right? Now think about that process. Like surgery is not like a fun thing, right? There's anesthesia, there's recovery, right? But surgery is great when it cures the problem, right? So it's not that, the physician in the emergency room or the family practice doc identifies that there's an abscess, refer to the surgeon, everything is great and happy and they're better. No, they have to go have a surgery, and that's not an easy thing, right? But if they go and do that, on the other side, the infection actually is gone. So they do not have the symptoms that it was constantly spinning off inside of them. And they also don't have the risk that maybe that infection gets out of the abscess and their life is then at risk. So the parallel is looking into the unconscious mind to what is inside of us that may be acting like that abscess. Even though this is an analogy, it is not theoretical. Like this happens all the time. And the abscess inside that person emotionally may be the bullying that went on right around the time of puberty, right? It may be that awful boss who was just so mean and like took that good job away from me, right? It might be that. It might be, that assault that I don't want to think about that's really still with me. It might be that death I still feel guilty about. I don't know what it is, right? But if there's an abscess in there, we want to understand it and then fix it, cure it, right? And that's what the therapy process can do. And that's why at times the therapy is unpleasant, the crying and the anger, that's the parallel of going through the surgery, right? But on the other side, we've dissipated the energy inside of it. Like we've taken care of it. And that's why it is so important to go into the unconscious mind if there are things that are really troubling us, or if we don't know what's going on, to cast the net of inquiry that may lead us there, because trauma is so common and we shove trauma underneath the surface because of the guilt and shame that it generates. And then it stays in us like an abscess and spins off symptoms. They could be symptoms of diffidence. They could be symptoms of overusing a substance. They could be symptoms of avoiding good things in our life. But they're pervasive symptoms that are really harmful to us that we can understand and fix.